These were corrupt police officers who were operating mainly from a perspective of making easy money, greed.
There has been a breach of confidence in our office internally.
There were bad apples that are sitting in our office. We just don't know they're sitting there.
He came to the bank and withdrew $50,000.
The plan was to just steal the money.
His exact words were, you need to be careful because you're going to get yourself hurt.
But then he threw the bag of money and ran back into the bank.
They pepper sprayed her and left her tied up with her hands behind her back in the house.
He shoved me in the back of the police car and told me to finish him off.
He was yelling, choke him out.
He said, please don't kill me. And I saw him take one last breath. It's murder. That wasn't the plan.
Over 12 police officers will soon be facing federal indictments.
This was the worst case of police corruption ever.
The cops were charged with stealing over $1 million in taxpayer funds.
I went from putting handcuffs on people to having handcuffs put on
me. Nestled into the northeastern coast of Florida, Jacksonville is the biggest city in the Sunshine State, nearly twice the size of Miami. Known for its scenic beaches and the bucolic river that runs through it, Jacksonville is a tourist hotspot. It's also one of the most dangerous cities in America.
A former state attorney years ago described Jacksonville as the tale of two cities, the haves and the have-nots. Those who live on one side of the river and those who live on the other.
It's a city with fairly broad mix of economic identities. There are parts of Jacksonville that have lots of middle class and lots of white-collar workers, and there are other parts of the city that have really poor neighborhoods.
Obviously, the beaches draw the money, but unfortunately, the Northwest Quadrant has struggled. It's infested with crime, drugs, violence.
There's no doubt that there are neighborhoods in this city that have been neglected for years. And one of the things that has happened in those neighborhoods is that the drug trade has been one of the ways that certain people sustain themselves, how they make money.
It's a constant fight for law enforcement to try to keep it under control. I wasn't born here, but I've been here pretty much my entire life. I realized that police work was something I would be interested in, and I made a career choice then to seek law enforcement. And when I graduated from the police academy, we went through the field training program with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, and that's what really guided me to the Northwest Quadrant of Jacksonville, which is in the high crime part of the city. I was not afraid to get involved working drug dealers, and I knew that's where I wanted to go. I started in patrol. I love the fast pace of not only chasing the bad guys, but every call was a different situation. So the variety was very interesting to me.
Dave quickly earned the nickname Blitz. He was known for his fearless and hard-nosed tactics, which made him a perfect fit with partner Carl Walden.
I first met Carl Walden in patrol. I had been in patrol a few years, and Carl had come on to the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office from the Orlando Police Department.
My impression of Carl Walden when I met him was that he was dedicated to the job, and I thought he was a good police officer.
Carl was quiet. He was not a loud person. He was aggressive. I mean, he was not afraid to get in the game, as I say, and go after these drug dealers, because that's basically what we were there for.
In the early 90s, Jacksonville police needed a lot of officers working narcotics cases. They needed narcotics detectives.
Ultimately, both Carl and Dave were recruited to the narcotics unit. It was a team made up of the toughest, most dedicated officers, fighting an uphill battle against the rising tide of drugs.
In the narcotics unit task force, we weren't answering calls for service. We were just basically freelancing on the hot spots in that part of the city. The communities that we were assigned to, the amount of drug activity is just over the top. It's every corner, every shopping center, it's everywhere. And it just bled down through the generations of the kids, swept up into the money and the lifestyle of these dealers. Crack cocaine in particular, it devastated these communities that we were riding in.
Carl Walden's time in the narcotics unit didn't last long.
Carl ultimately transferred from narcotics to what is known as our juvenile intervention team, and he also became a member of the SWAT team.
Then, in 1997, another hardcore recruit joined the narcotics unit and soon became Blitz's new partner.
I partnered up with Eric Sinclair in 1997. Eric is a rather large man, good personality, good worker. As me and Eric began to work together, things were great. I look forward to going to work every single day.
Eric Sinclair was a graduate of a college in Kentucky on a basketball scholarship. Mild-mannered, easy guy to be around.
Blitz and Sinclair formed a tight bond at work and on the court.
We had a basketball goal out in the parking lot of the narcotics unit, and that did not go well for me. Great athlete, very friendly, always wanted me to play with him. But at the same time, when it's time to do business, as narcotics detectives, he was ready to go.
Officers in the narcotics unit at the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office were the last line of defense between violent drug rings and ordinary citizens looking to keep their families safe.
There was 6 of us on the task force. We had a lot of similarities in our police styles. I think a lot of the basis of our selection was on the way we operated, being very aggressive and proactive towards drug dealers. We're in the street-level squad. I call it the quick and hit squad. We would build probable cause to get a search warrant for a drug house, and we kick in the door as a team. The whole squad's there.
The work was intense, so the code of honor had to be rock solid.
This isn't a regular job where you go to work and you're stocking shelves. Your life's on the line every day. And so your relationships are critical. One mistake and you've got a tragedy on your hand.
For Blitz, the trust between he and Sinclair was unshakable. But beneath the surface, a slight crack in the foundation had begun to appear.
When I first began to work with Eric and as our relationship grew as partners, there were no red flags at all. But looking back, there was one incident in particular that now makes sense. May of 1998. I had a search warrant for this apartment up on the north side of Jacksonville. And upon entry, took a couple people into custody. We were finding large amounts of cocaine everywhere. And I happened to be in this very small bathroom when I finished searching this bathroom, and I leave and I go elsewhere in the apartment. Just moments later, Sinclair starts yelling, and Sinclair is now in that same bathroom that I had just left. And there is cocaine all over the floor. And he's actually stepping on it, and I pushed him away. And he says, "What is it? What is it?" And I told him, I said, "It's cocaine." I said, "Where's the bag?" We never were able to find the source bag of that cocaine that's on the bathroom floor. The day it happened, it did not make sense. But looking back, there were bad apples that are sitting in our office. We just don't know they're sitting there.
By the spring of 1998, narcotics officers Dave Blitz Bisplinghoff and his partner Eric Sinclair were working together to rid the streets of Jacksonville of drugs. But on May 15th, an incident at a nearby bank would put Sinclair's reputation at risk.
Eric Sinclair worked off duty providing security at the South Trust Bank on Norwood.
One of Eric's duties was to escort any customer that was leaving with large sums of money out to their vehicles to make certain they got away from the bank safely.
It was dangerous work, protecting bank clients in a high-crime neighborhood, especially when it came to customers who withdrew tens of thousands of dollars at a time, like Sammy Safar.
Sammy Safar came to the United States from Syria in his early 20s, and he started his convenience store business, and he expanded from one store to eventually 3 stores, and was very successful. Part of Sammy Safar's business involved cashing paychecks.
Sammy and his family would go to the South Trust Bank and remove a large sum of money and come back and put it in their convenience stores so they could cash people's payroll checks.
And of course, he took a fee for that. So he was cashing about $50,000 worth of paychecks every Friday, 52 weeks a year.
But one fateful Friday, Sammy sent his nephew Hassan to the bank. What should have been business as usual ended up becoming a terrifying ordeal.
On May 15th, 1998, Hassan Tahan came to the bank and withdrew $50,000.
He was expecting Eric Sinclair to escort him out, as that was part of the off-duty work that Eric was employed with. As he was walking to his vehicle, he observed a male coming towards him with a gun in his hand. Hassan Tahan panicked and put the money into his vehicle and turned around expecting to see Officer Sinclair, but Officer Sinclair was not there. So Hassan Tahan ran back into the bank and notified Sinclair that he had been robbed in the parking lot.
Sinclair ran out, got in his car, radioed that there had been a robbery, and then said that he was in pursuit of the car. Later, Sinclair returned and said that he couldn't find the car.
The whole robbery squad responded to the bank robbery. We interviewed tellers. We would canvass the neighborhood, gather a description of the suspect. You just begin the process of trying to figure out who did it. The detective that worked the case told me that the family was concerned that because Sinclair did not walk him to the car, and Sinclair would always walk him to the car in the past, Sinclair may have been involved.
But that was dismissed fairly quickly by the robbery detectives who were investigating this. And really, for good reason, Eric Sinclair was a darn good narcotics detective.
Eric never mentioned anything to me at all about this robbery at the bank.
With Blitz in the dark about the cloud of suspicion over his partner, he and Sinclair continued to work their beat, trying to take down drug dealers. But then, 7 weeks later, on the 4th of July, there was another incident at the bank. Sammy Safar didn't show up for work as expected after making a big cash withdrawal the day before.
His brother, Siri Safar, went out on his own looking for his brother's 4Runner. And Siri's the one that found it. And he found the 4Runner parked directly across the street from the very bank that Sammy went missing. So something clearly was not right.
A short time later, a stranger made a terrible discovery just 7 miles away from the bank.
On July 4th, 1998, Sammy Safar's body was found. It was found back in a little bit of a wooded area down a dirt path, and he was laying face down.
He did not have obvious physical injuries that you could just look at and say, oh, well, this man has met with foul play. Although Sammy Safar's death wasn't something that got a lot of attention as an obvious murder, his brother certainly was suspicious.
After that May 15th robbery, Sammy Safar had decided he wasn't stopping for anybody but the police when he left the bank. So Sari Safar, Sammy Safar's brother, thought that police officers were involved.
Due to a lack of witnesses and proper evidence, Sammy's murder soon went cold.
the lead detective. He indicated to us that he was essentially encouraged not to waste a lot of resources on an investigation that looked like it was going nowhere.
Suspicions around Sinclair's possible involvement in the crimes at the bank soon faded. But everything changed 6 months later when Blitz and Sinclair were called in on a high-stakes drug investigation into two of the city's most feared criminals. Street names, Blue and Smiley.
Smiley is known as one of the most violent drug dealers in the city of Jacksonville, along with a partner of his known as Blue.
A confidential informant, also known as a CI, tipped off Blitz and Sinclair that he was being offered a bribe by Blue and Smiley for a large amount of money and cocaine.
If it goes through, we could utilize this bribe as more criminal charges that we can place on behalf of Smiley and Blue. So we get to the day of the bribe, the set, it is a go, and only myself and Eric Sinclair are aware of this bribe that's going to take place. Then, the morning of the day of the bribe is to be accepted. Another individual calls me. It's a completely different informant. I refer to him as CI number 1 because he was by far my most productive informant. He just tells me that he now knows for a fact that we are going to accept a bribe today from Blue and Smiley.
The plan to set up Blue and Smiley was now a bust because information got out to the dealers that it was all a narc unit setup.
It's just, again, here's another narcotics detective who tried to get Blue and Smiley, and you're unsuccessful. So I just quickly thought maybe Sinclair was bragging amongst other people because we're about to put our handcuffs on Blue and Smiley. So I questioned whether or not he had run his mouth. And he assured me he had not told anyone. So I left it at that. Later that evening, I get another call from confidential informant number 1. His exact words were, "The guy that you ride around with every day at work is putting your business out on the street." And then he warned me to be careful. He says, because you're going to get yourself hurt. And I waited a minute or two because I had to sink in because I didn't want to believe what he just told me.
In early 1999, detectives Blitz and Sinclair were investigating two of Jacksonville's most dangerous drug dealers, Abdul Blue Robinson and Derek Smiley Smith. But the case took a dark turn when Blitz got a chilling tip from an informant.
His exact words were, "The guy that you ride around with every day at work is putting your business out on the street." And he says, "You need to be careful because you're going to get yourself hurt." And he said, "I don't want to see you get hurt." I didn't want to believe what CI1 was telling me. CI1's my most trusted confidential informant. But at the same time, I didn't think he would make up what he had just told me. Because at the time, only myself and Eric Sinclair knew anything about the bribe.
If the informant was telling the truth, Eric Sinclair was leaking information about the investigation to the very drug dealers they were trying to put away. It was a frightening possibility that Blitz couldn't live with.
I told my lieutenant what had transpired. He asked me what I wanted to do, and I said, "I want to transfer up to DEA." I was going to leave the squad where Eric Sinclair was. I had to get away from Eric Sinclair. I never talked to him again.
Without any proof of wrongdoing, Sinclair remained at the sheriff's office for the time being.
I don't think the word spread that Blitz was worried that Sinclair was leaking information, In other words, that was between Blitz and his sergeant. And I'm sure that they were careful not to spread that information to too many people because they didn't want to tarnish him if it wasn't true.
I moved across the river to the DEA building where I joined forces with Richard True, who was currently assigned to the DEA task force. He's one of the policemen I know I can trust. with anything.
Shortly after Dave come to DA, Dave and I decided that we were going to do everything in our power to make a federal case on these two dope dealers. A bunch of state cases had been made, and for some reason or another, they seemed to always get themselves out of it.
But this time would be different. In the summer of 1999, Blitz and True quietly retrieved a warrant to put wiretaps on Blue and Smiley's phones. After several weeks of listening in, the two dealers were recorded speaking in code about a drug deal. It was the opportunity investigators had been waiting for.
We felt like we had enough information, enough evidence from the wiretap to go ahead and get warrants for Blue and Smiley on federal drug charges.
With Blue and Smiley now in custody, interviews with these suspects revealed disturbing information about Detective Blitz's former partner.
I think Blue played his ace card immediately. During the interview, he went on to explain that he had Eric Sinclair on his payroll, and that Eric Sinclair had been providing them information on any search warrants that the narcotics unit would be conducting on any of the various drug houses that Blue and Smiley had throughout town. But I didn't know whether or not Blue was telling the truth about Sinclair's involvement.
Details revealed about Sinclair during Blue and Smiley's interrogation shook the sheriff's office to its core. On September 1st, Sheriff Glover moved Sinclair from working the streets to a desk job. 2 days later, Glover went public, without naming names, about the investigation going on in the sheriff's office.
I'm concerned that there has been a breach of confidence in our office internally.
Sheriff Glover announced on the federal courthouse steps that his office was going to fully cooperate and be a part of the investigation of that breach of confidence. It was essential, we thought, to our investigation that persons who had done something wrong, we wanted them to know that we were coming after them.
Assistant U.S. Attorney Jim Clint began working with Blitz and True to build a case against Sinclair. They started by interviewing figures in the Jacksonville underworld, people like known drug dealer Daryl Crowden.
Crowden agreed to talk to us. He sat down, he gave us information about Sinclair's off-duty job at the South Trust Bank.
Crowden recounted startling details about the previous year's robbery. If true, they solved the baffling mystery that had stumped investigators for more than 12 months.
Daryl gave us the step-by-step of the robbery of Hassan Tahan. There were 3 players involved. Eric Sinclair working off-duty at the bank. Daryl Crowden, who was parked across the street. He was the eyes and ears for Jeff Reed, who is Daryl Crowden's brother. And Jeff Reed himself was going to be the gunman that actually does the robbery.
Sinclair walked out of the front door with Hassan Tahan, like he had done so many times before. But instead of walking Hassan Tahan all the way to the car, Eric Sinclair walked out of the bank and walked right back in. Mr. Tahan got to the car, Jeff Reed pointed a gun at him, and Hassan Tahan threw the bag of money and ran back into the bank.
Eric used his portable radio to report a robbery, but was providing bogus information as far as direction of travel and the type of vehicle that the suspect was seen leaving in.
After laying out the details of the bank robbery, their new informant had even more shocking revelations to share.
I don't know how many hours we were there, but the details he was giving us of crimes that we were not even aware of that took place because a lot of victims never called the police.
Crowden went on to describe what amounted to an elaborate criminal operation, a pervasive pattern of robbing citizens during home searches. But what he told the detectives next flipped the investigation on its head. There was yet another narcotics officer involved in their crime syndicate.
And that officer happened to be my former partner, Carl Walden.
In early 2000, DEA investigator Dave Bisplinghoff learned that his former partner from the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office was involved in a dizzying array of criminal activity, from committing bank robberies to colluding with drug dealers. Even more alarming, Eric Sinclair wasn't the only one of Blitz's former partners who had a hand in shady and illegal dealings.
To hear Darrell Crowden provide another police officer's name other than Eric Sinclair was shocking to us. That now we're no longer focused in on one police officer. We now have a second officer that we're going to have to steer our focus on. So that's the first time that we now have Carl Walden and Eric Sinclair, two of my former partners, working together. And we just sat there and absorbed it all. And when we walked out, we knew we had a lot of work to do.
In the beginning of this investigation, we were focused on Sinclair. Of course, with his working at the bank where the two robberies had occurred, he was definitely considered as a major target initially.
With the proof piling up against Eric Sinclair, in February, Sheriff Glover put him on paid leave.
I've relieved one officer, Eric Sinclair, of his law enforcement duties.
Blitz and his team at the DEA started looking into Walden, but they needed access to someone close to him. Their next tip came from another narcotics deputy who knew Walden well.
He says, Dave, if you want the answers to all your questions, you need to find an individual by the name of Kenneth McLaughlin. We learned during our investigation that Kenneth McLaughlin is the brother of a pastor here in town, and that Kenny had some personal struggles with drugs. Great athlete, University of Florida, but the drug monster had gotten hold of him and had steered him in the wrong direction. So we went to talk to him, and he said that his brother employed Walden at the church and decided that it would be a good idea to have Walden mentor Kenny and hopefully get Kenny back on the right path of life. So he created that relationship between the two.
Carl and I would go bowling, play basketball, just hang out, go to his mom's house and eat. Our kids would play together. I thought with Carl Tulich and his ability to be an officer, it would keep me out of a lot of different things that I was involved with. So I put my full trust in him.
But after more than a year of friendship, Kenny told the detectives that instead of helping him stay clean and out of trouble, Walden soon led him down a dark path.
The first time in 1997, Carl got the price of cocaine. I thought was unusual as a police officer. I didn't know if he was just curious because he was working in drug enforcement at the time, working undercover, but he asked me, which led to him bringing me some cocaine, asking me and selling it for him. I was a little shocked, and I believe he took my weakness for his strength, and he used that against me, knowing I wouldn't say no. But I was still struggling with my addiction. It continued like that for the next 6 months. That's when I told Jim and Blitz and Richard that Carl was committing robberies in 1998 because I was with him. The very first time that I was with Carl in the commission of a crime, he picked me up from work and he said, I gotta make a stop first. He said, hey man, I got a tip that there's a safe in there and a certain amount of drugs, a certain amount of money in the house. I'm going to get it. Are you going with me? Right out the blue, that's what he said. Are you going with me? And I had a choice to make, and I chose to go with him.
Walden informs McLaughlin that they're going to gain entry into the residence by informing those inside that the gentleman of that house, who happens to be a known drug dealer in town, that he had a warrant for his arrest.
So Kenny and Carl put a vest on, put a mask on, knocked on the door of Arnitha Culp's house.
Mrs. Culp informed them that her husband was not home, and they were not satisfied with that, so they ultimately forced their way into the house.
We went to her bedroom. It was supposed to have been a safe in the closet full of money and cocaine. We went and searched. There was no money and cocaine in the closet. So she was getting outraged.
So they pepper sprayed her and left her tied up with her hands behind her back in the house, and they left the scene. But she was able to get to her phone and call 911 and get the real police to our house.
Then a report went out that there had been a robbery, and that Mrs. Culp claimed it was 2 police officers who had done the home invasion and flex-cuffed her and sprayed her.
There was an APB out for a tall and short police officers that committed this crime. The description she gave was of us, and that was a little spooky. I asked Carl, why are you doing the things you're doing? He said, because I needed extra money to run my household. And he was tired of his drug dealers and having all this money. So he said, you got to do something about it.
Our investigation revealed by the summer of 1998, these crimes had progressed.
Once police crossed a boundary to taking money from drug dealers, and they got away with that, at some point the idea occurred that, well, maybe we can make money robbing other people too.
After Kenny detailed the multiple crimes he committed at the side of Officer Carl Walden, DEA investigators thought they had more than enough evidence to make their case. But then, there was one more confession that changed everything.
It just flooded over me. Everything flooded over me that had happened. I'm the only one that know in this room what's going on. I said, hold up. I put my hand in there and pushed him back down. I said, Richard, there's something else I got to tell you.
In June of 2000, Kenny McLaughlin was determined to clear his conscience, and after giving up information about crimes he carried out with Jacksonville's sheriff's officers, he became overwhelmed with tears.
I said, Kenny, are you okay, buddy? And he says, no, I got to get this off my chest.
I left it in God's hand that moment. I said, this is it. This is what I've been waiting on.
So, well, it's myself and Jim. We go back in, and he lays the story completely on us. A story of disbelief to us at the time that was just so out there.
Kenny gave us a step-by-step of what happened to Sammy Safar on July 3rd, 1998.
Kenny McLaughlin was able to recount the robbery and murder of Sammy Safar with chilling detail, because he was there.
I was told by Carl that Sinclair and his entourage had performed a robbery earlier and got away with it. And he wanted some of that money.
Sinclair told him, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm already worried, and if there are 2 robberies in a row about 6 weeks apart, then the spotlight's going to be on me. So he told Walden in no uncertain terms that he didn't want anything to do with it. But then he went on to tell Walden all of the specifics about Mr. Safar and his habits and how Mr. Safar picked up money every Friday, and basically gave Carl Walden a blueprint of how to accomplish another robbery.
So Carl started watching the movements of Sammy Safar for a couple weeks.
Carl decided to take his brother-in-law, James Swift, and Kenny McLaughlin to do the robbery with him.
Sammy showed up at the South Trust Bank, and he went in there to withdraw $50,000. Officer Eric Sinclair is working off duty at the bank. Sammy Safar comes into the bank, and he is last seen by witnesses driving off from the bank. Nothing unusual.
So Sammy Safar left with the bank with the money, and he walked out into the parking lot, followed by Eric Sinclair.
What Sammy didn't know was that Officer Carl Walden, Carl's brother-in-law, and Kenny McLaughlin were all lying in wait.
What Sammy did was he ran a stop sign. So Carl had proper cause to stop him now.
Sammy Safar sees the blue lights on the patrol car behind him. Sammy Safar pulls over and is approached by Officer Carl Walden in his patrol car. Parked around the corner is Carl Walden's brother-in-law, James Swift, and Kenneth McLaughlin. They're going to separate Sammy Safar from the $50,000 he had just withdrawn from the bank.
The plan was for Walden to take Mr. Safar in the police car and drive away, leaving the money in Mr. Safar's vehicle. Then McLaughlin and Swift were supposed to just steal the money from the car.
But when Walden goes to take Sammy Safar to his patrol car, he grabs the bag of money and brings it with him to the patrol car.
But Mr. Safar would not leave the money in the car because of the robbery that had occurred on May 15th of his nephew, Hassan.
So now you have Sammy Safar sitting in the back seat of Walden's patrol car with the money. So Walden, at that very moment in time, has decided that $50,000 is worth more than the life of Sammy Safar. And at that time, they drive off with Sammy Safar. It sends chills down my back, thinking what must have been going through Sammy Safar's mind as this is happening.
I told Carl, I said, man, you still can say this, the gig is up. He's not gonna separate from the money. But I can see the fear in Mr. Safar's eyes. Like, this is not gonna end well. And Sammy said, please don't kill me.
Sammy Safar tried to make a run for it the best he could, and then Carl Walden pushed him back into the car.
And the next thing happened, Carl began to choke him out with a rope and shove him in the back of the police car and told me to finish him off.
Walden was yelling, choke him out.
The rope was still around his neck, and I saw him take one last breath. I said, Carl, he's done. But he was looking at me through the mirror like, finish him off, kill him. I said, Carl, he's done. And the next thing happened, I got in the back seat, and we rode around for the next 30 minutes. But dead man slumped in the car. The relationship changed right there, because he didn't involve two other people into a murder. It's murder. That wasn't the plan.
It was hard for Kenny to give up Carl Walden. But the longer he told the story, the more confident and the better I think that he felt.
They didn't offer me a deal. It was me being truthful and wanting to tell the truth.
This is the piece of the puzzle that we've been missing, and this is going to allow us to move forward.
In June of 2000, Kenny McLaughlin told DEA investigators that he witnessed a gruesome murder carried out by a respected member of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, Carl Walden. Officers Blitz and True moved quickly to find out if the heinous claims were legitimate.
We were able to verify through reports that Carl Walden, the very next day after this murder, had his police car washed at the jail car wash. It's noted on the vehicle log.
He just made sure he covered his tracks. Me and him was cleaning the car. And I went home. I wanted to distance myself from Carl. I still saw him at church, still visited with him, but I was not committing any crimes with him.
In order to bring Charges, prosecutors quickly began preparing their case for a grand jury. Walden was sent home on paid leave, but he was clearly feeling the heat. He resigned from the sheriff's office on June 14, 2000, and moved to Virginia a few months later. Investigators kept a keen eye on him until December, when prosecutors finally received the victory they had been seeking for months.
On December 12, 2000, the grand jury returned a multi-count indictment against Carl Walden, Eric Sinclair, and James Swift.
The next day, Walden, Sinclair, and Walden's brother-in-law, James Swift, were arrested.
We traveled to Virginia, where Walden was working at a wholesale store. We got with the local law enforcement there, and they actually went into the store and arrested him.
So as we're on the way up to him, Carl just walks up to me, and he said, "Richard, I've been waiting on you." And I said, "I hate to see you this way, Carl." And he just turned around, put his hands behind his back. And, we advised him of his rights at that point, and he immediately invoked and never said another word to me to this day.
Both Walden and Sinclair were held without bail after their December arrests. Then, in September of 2001, Eric Sinclair pled guilty to conspiracy in the death of Sammy Safar, distributing cocaine and obstructing justice. He agreed to cooperate with investigators, which put him face-to-face with his former partner, Dave Bisplinghoff, for the first time in over 2 years.
We traveled to the Bradford County Jail when Eric Sinclair was being housed. He was sitting there all by himself, his head's down, and I chose to sit directly across the table from him. And he looked up and he had tears coming down his face. And he basically confessed to his roles in all these crimes.
Sinclair was able to corroborate what Crowden said about the robbery with Hassan Tahan. He also gave us information about the various drug deals that happened in the 1997 and early 98 time period, with Crowden selling the drugs and Walden getting the cut of the money. So he was able to give us a lot.
Through the investigation, another Jacksonville sheriff's deputy, Jason Pugh, was also implicated in schemes to steal money and drugs with Sinclair and Walden. Pugh cooperated with prosecutors and was sentenced to 5 years, 3 years of supervised release. The trial of Carl Walden began in the fall of 2002. For Blitz, it was a surreal conclusion to more than 2 years of working on a criminal case against his 2 former partners, both of whom he once trusted with his life.
You have Eric Sinclair on the witness stand. Carl Walden is the defendant, and I'm sitting there at that table. Now I'm looking at 2 of my former partners, and I'm thinking this is just unbelievable that this is happening. It was on in that courtroom, and it was intense.
Walden denied any involvement in Safar's murder. Instead, he told the jury that Kenny McLaughlin was responsible. After a 17-day trial that included 5 days of jury deliberations, Walden's fate was decided.
The jury reached a verdict in November of 2002, and he was found guilty.
I'm pleased with the verdict today.
Our case was based on the testimony of police officers who were involved in some sort of criminal activity and knew about Carl Walden's criminal activity. Found him guilty of 14 of the 15 counts.
6 years after officers Sinclair and Walden started working with drug dealers and stealing from them, and over 4 years after Sammy Safar's murder, there was finally some accountability and closure for the victims and residents of Jacksonville.
At its core, the case is about corrupt police officers who were operating mainly from a perspective of making easy money, greed. When a law enforcement officer does something to undermine the trust that has been given to him or her as a police officer, it's a crime against the community, and the victims are exponential.
Ultimately, we hope we got justice for the Safar family because Sammy paid the ultimate price. But in the end, this was JSO's good officers who made the case against JSO's worst officers. As police officers, we have tremendous power. But when you cross that line of trust, you surrender that power. It's given up. You forfeit it. It's over with. And that is paramount in police work. You got to have that trust.
From the 9-1, switch that over, that's the young blonde. I was at the West Coast, now I'm in the East Coast. Shawty wanna fuck.